Welcome to Never Again is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. I am Evelyn Marcus.
And I am Phyllis Zimpler-Miller.
Jews in France live in an increasingly complex and uncertain environment these days. We have the privilege to discuss this with Anne-Sophie Sebban, the director of the American Jewish Committee in Paris. Anne-Sophie has served as an attaché at the political chancellery of the French embassy in Israel and at the permanent mission of France to the United Nations, focusing on human rights and humanitarian affairs. She regularly appears on French TV and publishes articles and op-eds in several French and international outlets, including the Jerusalem Post. Anne-Sophie, welcome to our podcast, and thank you so much for coming on and joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
In your articles, you have described the recent elections in France as problematic for French Jews. Can you explain this to our audience, please?
Sure. It's been indeed quite shocking for French Jews to observe the political debates during both the European elections campaign and then the snap elections, where the Jewish question, if I may use that expression, became very centered, and that was very disturbing. And it actually started even before the elections. It was triggered, I would say, and accelerated by October 7th, after October 7th, and it culminated during the elections. So on one hand, we have the extreme right, Marine Le Pen's party, which I'm sure you've heard of, and her party, the Rassemblement National, the National Gathering, that has been gaining more and more popularity over the past 10 years. And the strategy of the party was, and of its leader, was actually to gain new voters by normalizing its image. So to that end, Marine Le Pen needs, of course, to get rid of its historical roots that she inherited from her dad, Jean-Marie Le Pen, who was well known for his anti-Semitic and revisionist public declarations for many years, and his party's co-founders and activists for their pro-Vichy regime and pro-Nazi regime past. And this is why we've seen with the young leaders of this party trying to embody the exact opposite, becoming more and more vocal in the fight against anti-Semitism, as well as being more and more vocal in the support of Israel. And of course, with October 7th and its consequences in France and elsewhere, the strategy became even more visible. And then on the other side of the spectrum, at the extreme left, we have seen the leader of what is called the NBAUD, in French, Les Insoumis party. So its leader, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, slowly kind of became our French Jeremy Corbyn. His party's representatives after October 7th have started to play the same dangerous game, being very anti-Israel, very anti-Zionist at first, and then slowly becoming even purely anti-Semitic. This was shocking to watch for French Jews, especially as the European elections campaign unfold. One of the party's candidate, actually, who was elected, she claims to be from Palestinian refugees descent, and she has spent the past months attacking Israel, like very violently attacking Israelis, but also attacking French Jewish journalists, attacking activists, intellectuals here in the country. Actually, several complaints have been filed against her. And now she's a member of the European Parliament, so quite shocking. And according to our last survey that we published in May, so we polled the French people at large and French Jews in February, March, 92% of French Jews today consider that this party, Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party, contributes to the rise of anti-Semitism in the country. So this is how problematic those elections have been for French Jews. We were purely and simply caught in a vice used for electoral and political strategies. And instead of becoming even more transpartisan at a time when anti-Semitism has exploded in the country, like it has exploded elsewhere in the world, we've seen anti-Semitism becoming politicized in a French political spectrum that became even more polarized because the extreme right actually won the elections, the European elections. And the extreme left gained several seats at the snap elections in France. So French Jews at the end of the day felt very lonely, as if because France seemed to have lost its political moral compass when we were watching the debates. Therefore, French Jews felt politically homeless.
So at the one hand, there was the winning, or the party that won most was at the right, which has a past of anti-Semitism, but currently fights against anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Yet it has the past of anti-Semitism. And at the other hand, there was a winning party on the far left that is currently anti-Semitic, Jeremy Corbyn style, very much with the extreme Palestinians. And isn't there a center in France, in the political center?
Yes, there is, and it's actually our current president's party. But it's been very difficult for his party during both the European and then the snap elections. And that's actually because the centrist party had a very low results at the European elections, that the president decided to go for snap elections because he's lost a lot of legitimacy. And of course, we still, I think French Jews still rely more on the center and on more like nuanced and Republican in the French way parties. But they've lost space, and we feel more and more like suffocating between both extremes on the right and on the left.
Right. So the political spectrum is polarizing.
Yes.
And Jews don't feel at home at either side.
Yes, on the extreme right, it's true, because they've gained a lot of votes, and there was really a risk of seeing Marine Le Pen's party becoming the first party, and maybe not Marine Le Pen, but one of her party's leader becoming prime minister. And on the other side, on the extreme left, it's more like they are very visible. They've been very visible in the medias, in the public debate, and they've done a lot of bad to the French Jewish community by being that anti-Zionist and that anti-Semitic. They haven't gained so much votes in the parliament, but they take a lot of space in the public debate, and they have caused a lot of damage.
Yes, I can imagine it's very uncomfortable for the Jewish community in France. In the past month, after October 7, a Jewish woman in Lyon was stabbed. A 12-year-old Jewish girl was gang raped, and various Jewish schools got bomb threats. Were these incidents organized terrorist attacks, or was this coming from the grassroots of French society? And could you please tell us a little bit more about these incidents?
Sure, it's a critical question, of course, and I can give you probably part of the answer, because some of these information are confidential and haven't been shared publicly along the year. But from what we know, regarding the three examples that you mentioned, first of all, the Jewish woman who was stabbed, it was in November, is a complicated case. Actually, the inquiry is still going on, and there has been some doubt about the anti-Semitic nature of that attack. Then the bomb threats in Jewish schools, some were coming from individuals, some from young French people, from the French society, not from organized terrorist or Islamist organization or anything else. Then the 12-year-old young Jewish woman, terrible, terrible story, who was raped, was actually assaulted by young men that she knew from her neighborhood, and who decided to attack her, to assault her, when they discovered actually that she was Jewish. So it seems that most of the recent anti-Semitic attacks were coming from individuals, but this doesn't mean, and I spoke with the protection services of the Jewish community, who those people are the most aware of the nature of each incident and the authors, and they're in touch with the French police, etc. It doesn't mean that what drives those individuals is not the influence of an ideology, of a propaganda, of more organized groups. We actually know that it is the case, that it is playing a heavy role. We know that usually the perpetrators justify their acts by using the Islamist propaganda's wording, pretending, for instance, justifying their action by saying that they are revenging the Palestinians, the Palestinian children. We also know from counterterrorism experts that this is exactly the strategy of many terrorist Islamist organizations. It's the new modus operandi to attack the West. They are not orchestrating big attacks like they did in the past, but they actually count on individuals from the countries that they are threatening to act motivated by the ideology or the propaganda. So that's why it's also very difficult to for the security services and the police to avoid some of those attacks, because they can come from anywhere, anytime, without being really planned a long time in advance. We have also seen something new in France this year with the Russian interference in the rise of anti-Semitic incidents. For at least 2 incidents, including one incident where David stars were tagged on several Jewish buildings in the city of Strasbourg and other cities. An inquiry showed actually that this was orchestrated by individuals who were activated directly by Russia. So as you know, in France, but also in the United States and elsewhere, foreign interference is a big issue. And Russia is playing with any topic that could destabilize our societies, our democracies. And this year, of course, the question of anti-Semitism has been one of them in France, has been playing out a lot. So this is something new that we have to combat as well.
Wow. And so it was, how did the Russians do that? How did they
paid individuals, I think, from Eastern European countries to just do it and do the tags, and there were also some tags on the Shoah Memorial in Paris, red hands that were painted. And it was also found that it was actually done by people paid by Russia.
Wow.
Let's talk, though, for 1 minute about the elephant in the room. You're sitting in Paris while the Olympics go on. And every morning when I don't see any news of Jewish attacks during the Olympics, it's a very good morning. So I take it that the Jewish community is in special high alert right now.
Yes, we are. It's a very strange time in Paris. I'm living in Paris, so I'm currently in the city. Actually, many people left the city before the Olympics started, because it has also created a drama in the city. A lot of neighborhoods are closed. It's difficult to go out from the cities. The roadways are closed, things like that. And of course, the level of security is insane, not only for Jews, but in general, and especially for some delegations. So of course, the Israeli delegation, the Israeli team, is actually followed by trucks of the GIGN. So the acronym for special, French special units, special forces. So far, there hasn't been any incident. President Herzog, as you know, maybe was here for the opening ceremony. There was a very, very high security. It took him some time to go out from the plane because apparently there was a security incident. We don't know the details. Apparently it was not a real threat. But so far, so good. There have been some calls for boycotting the Israeli athletes coming from the extreme left that I've just described, those members of parliament from Jean-Luc Mélenchon's parties who called for boycotting them and mobilize against them. So we didn't really know what it meant, but actually complaints have been filed against those MPs. Some athletes didn't want to shake hands with Israeli athletes. This has happened several times. For now, that's it. So we hold our breath.
So to go back to the incidents we were talking about earlier, how did the Jewish community and French society react to the news of these incidents? such as the 12-year-old girl?
Yeah, the French society reacted very, very strongly, and in general, France is, without no doubt, very determined and active to prevent those incidents and to condemn them and to protect the Jewish community. Our current Minister of Interior, Gérald Darmanin, has been forcefully leading the way for a zero tolerance policy. On October 8th, like the first thing that he announced was the reinforcement of all security around all Jewish sites. It was very quick. I think we were the first European country to do so. Learning from our past experience as well, France has decided to forbid several demonstrations that could end up in being anti-Semitic demonstrations. And I think we were also the first European country to do it, but we had some examples in the past. And you know, in our surveys that we publish every 2 years, it shows that the vast majority of the French people, it's like every 2 years, it's the same result. It's like 75% of the French society consider that anti-Semitism is the problem of the society at large and not that of French Jews only. So it speaks for what we call the silent majority. Of course, not everybody is in the street, but we had a big demonstration on November 13th against anti-Semitism in Paris and in other big cities. It created a political debate because of everything I've just described, of the strategies of our extremist political parties. But overall, we had a strong reaction. And as far as the Jewish community is concerned, the reaction is going in both directions, in two directions, I would say. But in my opinion, those are not contradictory. On one hand, of course, the explosion of anti-Semitic acts this year has resulted in a rise of the feeling of fear and of loneliness from the Jewish community. In our survey, it shows that more than 80% of French Jews feel lonely and fear of experiencing more anti-Semitism since October 7th. They feel lonely because of the reaction or the absence of reaction after in the face of October 7th itself and of its consequences for Jews around the world. We also see in our survey that 50% of French Jews have already considered leaving the country. And to be honest, it's been in the discussion during the campaign that we've just described. Like people, like French people, were so fed up at the end. Like a lot of the conversations included the question of whether we should leave or not, because it felt like really suffocating. Hopefully, I see now that it's getting better and French Jews feel better. But there was a real trauma. Also because, you know, the French Jewish community is very connected to Israel. We all have family, we all have friends. In comparison to the United States, it's very close to France. So the trauma of October 7th itself was huge. We see it in the behavior of French Jews. In our survey, it also shows this year that 1 in 4 to 1 in 3 French Jews are avoiding to wear Jewish signs, are taking off the mezuzah on their doors, but have also changed sometimes their names on delivery or cabs apps, because there have been some incidents of anti-Semitic assaults in cabs when they recognized a Jewish patronym, or Amazon deliveries. Some Jewish families were attacked. And I think that also the impact, the psychological impact of the images of October 7th, people being attacked in their homes, in my personal opinion, I think it has impacted a lot of our own fear that something could happen in our own place. And on the other hand, the French Jewish community, I have to say, has demonstrated a tremendous solidarity and resilience. I've never seen that. I'm sure you've also experienced it in the US. We have a very active community. We have French Jewish organizations, NGOs like ours being present in France. But like in addition to those, several spontaneous groups were created from grassroots, the grassroots Jewish, French Jewish community, to fight back against anti-Semitism, to identify anti-Semites, to support those who've been victims of anti-Semitism. to be more efficient in reporting online hate and anti-Semitic comments online, so the platforms could, erase them quicker. So there are several groups on WhatsApp, deciding to report the same comments so it can go quicker. A collective was created called Nous Vivrons, which means we will live. That is very grassroots and has been very, very active, that demonstrates in the streets every time there is a major anti-Semitic incident, or every time there are politicians doing anti-Zionist or anti-Semitic comments. And so actually, after October 7th, I think the Jewishness of French Jews has been reinforced, has been strengthened. And we actually asked the question because we were wondering, we felt it among the community, that some people who are not involved at all in Jewish advocacy decided to take on to the streets and to be more active. And the numbers shows it, that most French Jews said that their Jewish and Zionist identities has been reinforced this year. So that's the positive.
And Anne-Sophie, we sometimes see pictures of demonstrations against anti-Semitism in France.
Yeah.
How often in a year are those demonstrations taking place, and how many people you think are participating in that?
So there was one big demonstration this year that was November 13th. It was at the initiative of the president of the parliament and the president of the French Senate. It gathered, I would say, 200,000 people.
Wow.
All over France. I have to say that it was, what we saw in Paris was mostly like elite people and older people. Unfortunately, we haven't seen, I think, enough young French people. And we see that in our survey. It's quite striking to see that the older you are, the more aware you are of the issue of anti-Semitism. For instance, when we ask, in your opinion, like, which minority is the most targeted minority by hate? And in France, we know for sure that it's Jews, like in comparison to what they represent in France. And the older you are, the more aware that Jews are the most attacked. And the younger you are, the less aware, like between 18 and 25, they really don't see Jews as potential victims. That's how we analyze it. Mm-hmm. They would think that French Muslims are the most exposed to hate, for instance.
Yeah. Okay. According to the Anti-Defamation League's monitor, 15% of the French population harbored anti-Semitic attitudes in 2023. Yet, 62% of the French Muslim population had such attitudes. With a Muslim population 10 times as big as the Jewish population in France, is there a permanent problem here for the Jews in France? And if so, how should it be dealt with?
Well, this is a very sensitive issue to raise in France. You know that we don't do ethnic statistics. And it's actually fairly recent that we can measure, that we can poll French Muslims, that we can measure stereotypes among different categories of the population, including depending on their religious or national background. We've actually done it with AJC for the past 10 years. And the first time we did it, we were highly criticized. But the reality is here, and the French society is more aware today of the problem. It took like 20 years to raise awareness about it. Now we need France to confront it and to address it in public policies. So it's true that French people with Muslim background have seriously more anti-Semitic prejudices than the rest of the population. If we go in more details, we see that anti-Semitic tropes connected to hatred against Israel are even higher. And so to deal with this phenomenon, I think that first of all, we need to acknowledge this reality. And for some part of the French establishment, we are still there. Some people are still blind to this
Mhm.
issue and would prefer to hide it under the carpet. And we need French people to understand that this has nothing to do with stigmatization of a group, and this is about how to best combat this phenomenon. And what we need to do is to deconstruct the prejudices that are the most that are affected, that are most adopted by French Muslims, to identify them and to try to promote new narratives about Jews. I think that because hatred against Israel plays a role here, we know it's fueling anti-Semitism among the Muslim population. It's used by Islamist groups in France, and this is why we've been pushing very hard for the adoption of the IRA working definition, as you know, that France finally adopted a few years ago. And there's a phenomenon that plays out a lot with the French Muslim community, which is victimhood competition. We actually measure it in our survey. It's much higher than for the rest of the French population. We ask if people think that, for instance, commemorating the Shoah is preventing from commemorating other crimes against humanity. And among French Muslims, it's very, very high that people believe that and see the fight against antisemitism as a means to prevent or to minimize other forms of racism. So it's a psychological trick, I think, that needs to be deconstructed. But this is playing out a lot, and this is being used by the Islamist propaganda and by other groups, by the extreme left as well, who's manipulating this our French Muslim community. So I think we also need to promote more widely the common history of Muslims and Jews. We had this in mind, but today, of course, the context is not maybe the best, but hopefully one day we'll be able to build on the Abraham Accords effect on cultural exchanges. And for instance, in France, you know, we have a big Moroccan community. Actually, today was a big day for Morocco. It's the 25th anniversary of the ascension to the throne for the king, and France just announced that they are recognizing the sovereignty of Morocco on the Western Sahara. And for instance, like, Jews have been strong supporter of this, and for that, like, Moroccans are very grateful. Like, there are a lot of benefits to this relationship and to the relationship with Israel that we will need to promote in order to create new narratives. And finally, I think that when we fight against anti-Semitism in France, it's usually in public policies always disconnected to other phenomena which are also tied in with anti-Jewish hatred and that are also impacting a lot the Muslim community. So, you know, we have an issue with Islamist radicalization, for instance, and we have all sorts of policies to fight against it. And we know that anti-Semitism is at the heart of the driver of the radicalization process, but those policies are not enough coordinated, in my opinion. Same with the conspiracy theories and fake news. There are all sorts of new policies to fight against those phenomena. But what is anti-Semitism if not a conspiracy theory by essence? So I strongly believe that we should connect more and coordinate more on all of these policies to be able to be more impactful and to have an impact on the Muslim community in particular.
I fully understand that it's a sensitive topic to raise, the high amount of anti-Semitism within one ethnic minority in French society that itself is vulnerable to to being discriminated. I'm also happy to hear. So I'm not surprised that it takes so long to openly acknowledge this problem. But you know, if one minority hates the other minority, it's a problem. But it's hard to address because it's so sensitive. I'm happy to hear, at the other hand, how many ideas your organization has, and maybe French society has to further develop a policy against this, and that there are so many how do you say so many opportunities there that you just mentioned. For instance,
Yeah.
Morocco, most Muslims in France are of Moroccan background, and Morocco has joined the Abraham Accords, and so that may and we know that other countries that participate in the Abraham Accords, for instance, the Emirates, um, have been successful in diminishing the anti-Semitism in their population, in their school books, in their education, and maybe that could spill over to Morocco, and from there to uh, French Jews, French Muslims of Moroccan background. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think those are all great ideas. I hope they will come in time, because the pressure is the time pressure is also there. We see an
Yeah.
escalation of anti-Semitism going on in France.
Which brings us to the
Yeah.
next question, which is that the chief rabbi of Paris, Moshe Sabag, has advised young French Jews to leave France for Israel or another secure country. What do you think about this?
So first of all, I know Moshe Sebban quite well, so I have a lot of respect for him. So I respect his advice, although I personally believe that this aspiration to go to Israel, to make Aliyah or not, is very individual. It's an individual Jewish journey that is unique to each one of us. I have strong beliefs about it and thought about it. I believe that this decision is always driven by all sorts of rational and irrational reasons, which are specific to every one of us. I believe that every Jew has a different experience and perception of antisemitism as well, depending on where we live. When I'm asked the question, and I'm often asked by my American colleagues, like, how is it to be a Jew in France? I always answer, it depends where you live. Like, if you live in the center of Paris, you don't have the same experience as if you live in the Seine-Saint-Denis, in a French suburb, or in a tiny city where you're the only Jew. Like, so we all have a different perception, a different experience. We also have a different unique assessment of the situation today in France, how risky, how bad it is, and how better can it be somewhere else if we don't talk about Israel. And actually Israel including, which has a lot of problems these days. I believe that every Jew has also its own limits of what he or she can accept in terms of anti-Semitism in a country. Every one of us set the limit differently and draw different conclusions. So it's very difficult to give such an advice. And Jewish leaders like chief rabbis have a responsibility, of course, to speak to the community. And on one hand, I also understand him. If you do a macro analysis of the future of the Jewish people and the future of Jewish communities in Europe, and I can understand the vision that young French Jews, young European Jews, if they want to invest in the future of their children because of the political situation here, we could assess that they would have a greater interest in moving now to Israel and prepare the future of their kids and having the time to integrate themselves in the Israeli society. And as a strong Zionist, I'm a very strong Zionist. I believe that Israel is, of course, every Jew's home. However, I also believe in the long and complex history of the Jewish people. I also believe in the role played by the diaspora, the diaspora's contribution to Israel and vice versa. Therefore, as a Jewish leader, if I can consider myself as one or a young aspiring Jewish leader, I would encourage people with strong Zionist conviction to, yes, make Aliyah and go to Israel if they are at this point in their journey. But I would also say to those who want to stay in France or anywhere else, that they should be able to stay and to flourish and without being worried for their security, and that we all should fight for as Jewish leaders around the world. And last but not least, this is also the answer I usually give, because I strongly believe that today we live in a very globalized world, and that borders don't really mean anything, especially when you're a Jew, because we are, I think, by essence, a decentralized people, and the place we actually concretely live in has not the same meaning as before, and it's all about how we position ourselves in this world. And what I envision for the future of the Jewish people is that no matter where we will live, Israel will have more and more center place for us, for our identity, for our position in the world. So
Okay, that's you certainly are, in my view, already a leader in the Jewish leader, and
thank you.
I'm sure that we're gonna hear more from you, even more from you in the future, because you're loaded with vision, and we need that.
Thank you.
What you already said many things about it, but are there still more things you think that can be done by Jews and others to restore a healthy social environment for Jews and all citizens in France?
Okay, so this is a huge question, and I will try to give an ambitious answer. Very, very general. I don't have the magical recipe, but as you said, I think that to restore a healthy environment for us Jews, we will need to restore a healthy environment for all, because it's our democracy which is at stake. What French Jews are going through right now reflects, as I said earlier, I think a failure of our moral compass, or that we've lost somehow our moral compass. We see it in the political debate. We see it in other at other levels. So as far as France is concerned, more precisely, I think that we need to re-enchant, I don't know if you have this word in English, or to reimagine our model, the French Republic that has attracted so many people from all over the world, including Jews, but not only, our French intellectuals, writers, thinkers. I think we need to make sure that we reimagine this model in ways that we will make sure it can also inspire the young and the next generation, but while being sure of what we want to affirm. Like, we don't need to necessarily please everyone, but at least to affirm what is our model, what we want. We need to, I think, to re-insufflate what universalism, and I think France has contributed to what universalism is. So to reaffirm what it really means, to reaffirm what secularism really means, what freedom of expression really means, and to show people, and especially the young generation, what it can bring to them. What we, with this model, we can bring to the world, and what it can bring to citizens themselves, what it can allow them to do, what it can allow them to dream of. I think that we had a tendency to forget about these very simple things. We also need in France to rethink, I think, our immigration and integration policies, which have been a failure for decades. Our colonial past, our post-colonial past, and how France failed to integrate, as we talked about, the people coming from North Africa, from Morocco, from Algeria especially. And there's no magical recipe, but as when we talked about anti-Semitism among the Muslim community, there was a clear tendency not to address the issue. So let's just start to at least try to confront it and to find a solution. But for now, it's still a little bit under the carpet, except if you're from the extreme right, and then your solution is very extreme and doesn't help at all. So yeah, I think that France must reconnect with its unique model, its inspiring values, and at the same time, French people with all sorts of backgrounds and origins, which have been, which are today, and will continue to be part of the French society fabric, need to be sure that they will be able to thrive and to flourish in their complex identities without being worried. So yeah, to conclude, I would say that for me, a healthy environment for Jews and for all will always be an environment with very strong, clear, and common belief in universalism, but a universalism that is going hand in hand with freedom of particularism.
As we come to the end of this interview, that's an excellent conclusion. But if there's anything else you'd like to add before we thank you and thank our listeners.
Thank you very much, first of all. And I would also, I'm now frustrated because I would also like to hear from you and what you're experiencing in the US as American Jews. And I'm sure there are a lot of common feelings.
Yes, there are.
And vision also.
There are.
For the future.
Yeah. There are. Phyllis, can we add a few minutes about that?
Certainly. Would you like to say something?
Okay. Well, I'm originally from Holland. I live in America since 18 years. And in both countries, by the way, Holland and America, we see the same kind of polarization between far left and populist right. And as Jews, we experience that the populist right is more standing up for Israel and against anti-Semitism, because it comes a lot from the far left and it comes a lot from Muslim populations and ideologies. So, but we would rather have the good old centrist, where political ideology where everything is moderate and there is a place for everybody, without being so harsh about each other. So I think in the United States, and especially since well, I think before the most recent developments in the United States with the upcoming elections and the new candidate, there was more of a feeling that there was centrism, somewhat of centrism possible in the United States, but now we see that it's maybe going as polarized as in France. Do you agree, Phyllis?
I would say that our political system is much different than France's political system. So something like a snap election doesn't even have meaning for us. But I will say that the next few months are going to be very tense for American Jews. Without talking about the people involved, it's just the party. We basically really have only two parties. The others are so small. The Republicans and the Democrats, and the lead up to and then after the election could be very tense. And anti-Semitism is frequently used by, shall we say, extremist candidates to make their points. So every time one of the political candidates makes a statement about Israel or anti-Semitism, we all hold our breath almost to see what he or she is going to say and how it's going to affect American Jews and Israeli Jews and Jews all over the world.
Yes, and so in the populist movement, it always attracts some ultra-nationalists, white supremacists in the margin. But it brings out, in general, feelings of them and us. And as Jews, we're always a bit wary of that. And we see that the far left has grown in America too, and very much and aggressively sympathizes with the Palestinian issues and movements, and that automatically also scares us as Jews.
And I just like to add, for anyone who doesn't know this, because a lot of American Jews don't, when you see groups such as Jewish Voice for Peace or another very far left group with the name Jewish in it, frequently the percentage of Jews is very, very small. This is Evelyn's knowledge base much more than mine, but you have to look at the funding, which is frequently very much concealed. And just don't think, if you're in Europe and you see Jewish Voice for Peace said so and so, please don't think it's a lot of Jews. It's basically percentage.
Yeah.
So
hopefully.
with saying, yes, hopefully, saying that, we thank you so much for coming on the show. This is really important that our listeners around the world know what's going on in France, especially at this time. We thank our listeners. For those of you who want to know more about Evelyn's work and my work, you can go to Never Again Is Now podcast at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And please, whenever you can, speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.